everyone. This is Erica Plank-Hagan. I am the Communications Manager for the Presbytery of Southern New England, and this is Connecting Our Conversations. We, PSNE, are a regional governing body in the Presbyterian Church USA, and this podcast is our space for conversations that push the edges of our faith and help us to deepen discipleship. Today, I am talking with two very fun people, the Reverend Mieke Vandersall and Matt Beams. They are from our Not So Churchy community here in the Presbytery. Not So Churchy is a spiritual, intentional worshiping community created by and for those who have been hurt and stifled by the traditional church. And I'm going to turn it over to them and let them tell us a little bit more about what that is and who they are. So, Mieke, why don't you start?
My name is Mieke. Thanks, Erica. And we started Not So Churchy, I don't know, over 10 years ago now, maybe more like 12, but I'm not totally counting. And, at that point, we were an in-person community in New York City, bringing people together from the 5 boroughs in New Jersey. Matt Beams here is a lifelong New Jerseyan. And then in the pandemic, we of course went remote, and we've stayed remote, bringing people together from all over the country. So that continues. And we became a part of the Presbytery of Southern New England about a year ago, I'd say. I recently, it's a long story, but have a home in Connecticut and feel more connected to that place. So I became a member of the Presbytery, and Not So Churchy came along with me.
Packed in with the moving boxes.
Exactly. Yeah. You get me, you get them. So, yeah. Matt.
So I'm Matt Beams. I am almost a lifelong New Jersey resident. I went to school in Virginia, and I lived 6 years in Chicago. So I have gotten out of Jersey, but Jersey always calls me home. So I'm glad to be here in Jersey City. I've been a member of, or I don't know, member of, but at the beginning we weren't members of, right? We were on some
Still
sort
aren't.
of...
Still aren't.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't really say that. But excuse me, we were, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, what does time mean anymore? When I remember we had meetings in some church offices where we were discussing who we wanted to be and how did we want to set this intentional community. And I was really happy to be included in that through a random series of circumstances and dealing with another Presbyterian who connected Mieke and I together at another church that I was a member of, an actual member in on the rolls. And so then I've been a part of it ever since then. And I'm really pleased to be not just a participant and a congregant. We don't use any of those words. We are Not So Churchy, but I'm not a part of our community. I'm so glad to be part of our community. And I'm really also glad to be a part of our board for several years now, who kind of helps guide the community and takes care of the business of, those kinds of things. And as far as the New England goes, I still live in Jersey City, but one of the sort of strange blessings of this past couple of years has been that we have members from all over now. So we started in person and we met in person and we loved it. And then when the pandemic shut everything down, we went to virtual and we found a way to love that too. And now we have people joining us from all over the country. And so Mieke took herself to Connecticut and took us to New England, and we all talked about it. It seemed like the Presbytery of Southern New England was going to be a great fit for us. And so we're really pleased to be a part of it. I certainly am. And I know the rest of the board is as well.
So one of the things I love about Not So Churchy logistically is that you don't quite fit what people, how our systems are set up. I am trying desperately on our website to get you all to be searchable in our list of worshiping communities, and whoever set it up with a physical GPS as its link for the first thing. And I'm going to work this out, but right now it doesn't quite exist. And I think that actually is really interesting. And as we think forward to who we are as a church, are we really someone who's put in these geographical things, or are we maybe something bigger? And then also how you all felt called to be community as something that doesn't quite fit. I bet a lot of Presbyterians listening to this right now are going, but you have to show up and sit in a pew and be a member and do all this. So I would be interested, if you're not doing that, what do you do?
Yeah, these are questions that when we first began, we call ourselves a worshiping community, and that's before the Presbyterian Church coined that term. And so, way back in the day, people were saying, "But what happens if you want to baptize someone?" It's like, well, wouldn't that be a crisis? Like we can figure that out when we get to that point.
And we did.
And we did. What happened? And it was a very complicated baptism across two denominations, actually. It's another long story. What happens if, you want to take communion? Okay, well, I'm a member of this presbytery, and you validated me into this ministry, and you've given me permission to do that. And we do that every single time we gather. Now it's obviously virtual. So I can't even remember your question now, Erica, but basically, like, we just don't fit in the neat boxes. We received a grant from the Calvin Institute of Worship, and they equally were really struggling because everything is geographically based. Where do we put you? It's like, oh, we're everywhere. So the question was, what do we actually do? Who actually are we? I think, and we gather once a month on the second Monday of each month for worship, and we have theology group on the third Monday of each month, and we have various in-person and virtual gatherings throughout the rest of the year for community building and service-related opportunities and that kind of thing. And that's kind of what we do. So everything is deeply connected to music and the arts. Our worship service is created by those of us who were there. All of the music is composed for the night that we're together, and it might last beyond that, and it might not. We do very churchy things in some ways. We read scripture in ways that are perhaps more exploratory than often is the case. We do communion, the words of institution. You'll recognize them, but they're not traditional. And it's all sung as well and improvised. And so around that, we have an offering, and we have prayer time, and we have gathering time, and we have all of these things. It's just how we do it that is a little bit different.
I would say also, we've had people who've come to Not So Churchy either in person before, in the before times, or virtually now. More than one person who has said, wow, for a group that calls yourself Not So Churchy, you're actually sort of churchy. So I think the not so churchiness of it comes from our queering of things and our, I listened as you read that description at the beginning, and it is true that we are created for those folks who have felt that they didn't have a place, and who for those folks who do feel that. But I think how it started is that has morphed into something. We are still that place for those folks, but it doesn't seem like, oh gosh, everything else doesn't work, so come here. It seems like this is really a special thing that people choose to be a part of. And so we do have all these kind of churchy elements, right? And we have a lot of singing and a lot of liturgy, frankly. And we really can kind of all be together in that, but in this queer, intentionally queer, in a very broad definition of the word, space, where we're really looking at things in an inclusive, broad-minded way.
So I want to dig in a little bit to that word, the queering of it, and making it queer, because I bet everyone hears that word a different way when they hear it. So what I think I'm hearing you saying is that in the space, you're not making it binary, not making it black and white. We do this, but we don't do this. It's a very open space for exploration of you as a community and you with the divine. Am I close?
Yeah.
Yay. Can I join?
Yes.
Come on over.
Everyone actually is welcome. We really would love to have.
So I imagine a lot of people called to that are people who themselves would identify as queer, but not necessarily.
Yeah, but not necessarily. And then, a lot of folks who might not come in realizing they are queer and then figuring it out eventually also. And we have several parents of queer kids who have found this space to be really important also, and didn't know their kids were queer until they were part of us for a while, and then they came out. And it's like, oh, I'm really glad I have this space.
How amazing.
Part of it. So I think it's queer in the sense of we don't fit other places for various, whatever reasons they might be. So many different reasons, and not just around the boxes around like gender or sexual orientation or whatnot. Like there's just not quite feeling like we're made for this world, and figuring out how to navigate that together.
And I think that what folks realize, at least my experience with people coming to Not So Churchy and people that I've talked to, is that almost everyone in some way feels at some point like, I don't quite fit in this world, right? But we're so stuck in, or not stuck in, we're like sort of programmed to be this way or that way, right? And so this intentional queering of things allows people to see like, well, this has nothing to do with my orientation or my gender identity, but gosh, there are all of these other ways that I feel like I don't fit into what I think I was brought up to be like. And so then this just creates a space for all of that sort of stuff to happen.
Yeah.
I'm really interested that we're having this conversation now in a time, I think Advent and then into the new year in our liturgy as the church and what we're doing, we're talking about how we're not quite made for this world, how we're looking ahead to the next. And so, yeah, that's a good conversation to be having right now. Yay. Do you all think, or all right, maybe you don't plan this way. Eventually, presumably, we'll be able to gather in person more easily without fear of pandemic. Do you think you will evolve back to that, or has the pandemic opened up something that you want to keep exploring, or both?
Matt, you want me to do that? Or, I mean, I don't even know what you're going to say.
Well, what I would say, let's see. I would say that, I mean, we talk about all of this, right? I have a cousin we don't even know about yet who lives in Georgia, and I hope she's planning on coming with her son in January. We have people who regularly come from Michigan, who come from Seattle. They are now regular members of our community. So if whatever happens, we will always have a space for all of those folks. Whether it means that we go back to the space we physically used to be in Manhattan and do some sort of hybrid thing there. People have actually gotten sort of good at, I've been to some hybrid things that I was like, oh, this really works. But also we have people who are exploring what it means like to be members of the community, but always entirely virtual. We have tentative plans to have an in-person gathering, like a retreat, where we actually bring folks in from the places. But all of that is depending on people's safety and their feelings of safety and all of that. The other thing I think is important to bring up about this is that there are folks who are not able to come, not because of COVID or not because of anything like that, but because they're homebound or because the stairs or because of all those kinds of reasons, who now have a place where they can, or I'm not saying we're the only ones, but they have a place where they can come. And so all of those folks are integral members of our community. So whatever it is that we're going to do, everyone is going to still be included in some fashion.
That speaks to me really personally. My older son has intellectual disability such that he can't go to in-person worship. It is too much. And a real gift of the pandemic for my family has been that he can participate in these things and loves it. And as these church communities talk about going back and what they want, I don't want it to just be a camera pointed somewhere where he observes. I want him to be in it. And I really love that you also want your people to remain in it, because they're your people. Like, it's beautiful.
What we're doing now is that there's small pods that are forming in people's homes. So I kind of love that we're kind of going back to, like, home church kind of stuff. And I mean, I'm a little bit more like, I don't see us ever gathering in person again than Matt is. And I think Matt was very gracious around, like, whatever it will be, we will make sure that it is accessible to everyone. I know so many pastors who are really, really challenged in the hybrid world. And especially since we're so experiential, I think it's really hard to play to both the camera and the Zoom community and the in-person community. So we have many members of our board now who are not in the New York City area, one who's in Southern New England, one who's on Cape Cod. I guess that's Southern New England too. Yeah. One who will be coming to us from Minnesota, so if half of our governing board is not in New York City, I don't know. And yes, we started planning a retreat where we can actually meet people that we've only been knowing online. And just the second that I started getting comfortable with that, Omicron came, or Omicron, or however you say it. So it's like, I don't know, guys, I'm not sure we're going to put that deposit down on that retreat center, when every time we start thinking about it.
So much pivoting.
Yeah, I don't know. So we'll have that conversation again in January, but yeah.
Do you think you all had an advantage in this time because you were already used to pivot? Yeah. All right. We'll just, totally. That's the obvious thing.
100%. We just, when we first started doing online, I hated it. I 100% hated it. And I remember telling a friend how much I hated it. And then it's like, okay, well, tough shit. Like, you got to figure it out. So, we figured it out, and now we're really good at it. And it just wasn't, it was hard not to be together just because I like hugging my people, but it was so much easier for us to pivot, the worst word of the year, because that's all we've done. So, yeah.
Well, and I'm thinking of all those people that have now become part of your community that wouldn't have been if you stayed within physical hugging parameters.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for certain. And part of what we got good at, we even had an ordination.
We did.
In a virtual ordination, and it was attended by, there were over 100 people on the Zoom call. It was pretty
amazing.
Amazing. Wow. And holy and blessed. And there were people who were able to be there who wouldn't have been there otherwise, right? So, whatever my hopes about, like, being together someday, I think, like Mieke said, with the pods that we're having, some people who feel comfortable and who live near each other are getting together, and then they join the call together. So something, some way, but regardless of what we do, everyone is going to be a part of it for sure.
Yeah.
So it sounds like when you all started, you sort of saw who was in the room and what their gifts were, and built what you did out of that. You had musicians, you had artists, you had people who thought, in this new way. And then COVID required you all to kind of pick up new gifts that you didn't already have. I'm kind of seeing a bouncing between internal spiritual gifts that you already had and the things you picked up and are now useful. There should probably be a question at the end of that. Do you see a kind of bouncing? Is that something that resonates with you all?
Yeah, we in our beginning narrative, I that's a whole other podcast around how we started and why we started and the state of the denomination at that point. And it's a very, it's a long, deeply personal story. And but what I saw was that in New York, there was an overabundance of musicians who were extraordinarily talented and underpaid, and who were seeking some kind of spiritual community, Matt being one of them. And so that's how that's why we, I think, became part of why we were such a musical creative community from the beginning. And in that question of what do we have an overabundance of, the pandemic shows us that we have an overabundance of others like us that are all over the place. And so our participation has really doubled, I'd say, since the pandemic began. And it's only increasing, but not in a way that's unsustainable. We really work hard at caring for each other, and that's not just my job, that's everybody's job. And you were talking about the ping-ponging, the kind of the back and forth. I don't know, but I think it's connected somehow, what I said. There you go.
I think, I just want to draw attention also to, you were talking, Mieke, about the musicians. We've also had visual art. We have dance. We haven't, some of those things are harder to put into, have been harder to put into practice. They took more training, took more ideas, more different ways of thinking to bring some of that into the online world. Some of it involved Mieke sending the pods and the people packages so that we all had supplies, right? So the Not So Churchy paid for these little packages so that everybody who came on that particular month, we all had a notebook and crayons, and we made things together on Zoom. And that was really important. The visual arts has always been important. This is for another podcast also, but over
we'll just do an offshoot.
Over here, you see this brown tube behind my shoulder contains a scrolled up long piece of paper, which is the timeline of Not So Churchy's existence. We haven't affixed anything new to it since the pandemic started, but that was a huge piece that we made at a retreat that we did, and it really shows all of the comings and goings and the high spots and low spots. And so we're really connected to our history with each other, within the presbyteries, within the church, and our communities.
I'm so interested on how, because I know you will, on how you're going to continue to tell and express that story visually in what we're creating now. I'm really interested. I don't expect you to have an answer. I'm just saying, like, I'm looking forward to that with you.
Yeah, thank you. Oh.
So when most of the people who listen to this will be from traditional Presbyterian mainline, physical spaces. And I guess I'm saying, what, if you could give them a little love note for this time of like what you've learned from what you're doing and what you see kind of traditional spaces struggling with right now. It could be tough love, but what would you say?
Matt.
I went first last time. Okay. I would say, gosh, that's a deep question. I grew up not in a Presbyterian church, but I grew up going to church every Sunday, and I'm actually pretty churchy in a certain way, and I appreciate liturgy and tradition, and I'm like strangely old-fashioned for like a radical queer person. So I think what I wish for is that, or what I don't even remember what the words of the question were, but what's your love note? My love note, thank you, Mieke, is to remember that what I've learned over the pandemic is that the ways that we care for each other is like Christ's work in the world, right? So we have this WhatsApp group, right? And it's like a little aside, but over time, at a certain point, it was just what we said, like, okay, here's the Zoom link. Can anybody read this week? And now it's blossomed into something where people put their prayer concerns and people respond to it. And some people are very active and some people are just lurking, but people are part of that. And so it's this way that we care for each other. You were talking before about how, we're looking to this something that comes ahead, but I'm always thinking about on earth as it is in heaven. And so how can we be what we're called to be on earth as it is in heaven? And so that's this nurturing between people, this caring, this love that we show for each other. That's how I try to be an expression of Christ, to the best of my ability whenever I can be. And that's what I have learned over this pandemic, or maybe not learned it, but that's what's really helped me, and I think how I've helped others. And so I think in the midst of fear and all that kind of stuff, like, remember that, just be for each other, be there for each other. And also, I just invite every single person who's going to see this to please come.
Yes.
And not be afraid by the name Not So Churchy, or not be afraid if you're not queer, or you don't know what queer means, or that word sounds strange. You'll queer, strange. Just come on in, and the water's fine.
The water's fine.
Mieke?
I got nothing.
I got nothing.
That's great.
It's a love note from everyone. So caring for one another is church. And come on in, the water is fine. I like that.
Good.
Yeah. Oh, my friends, unless something is burning on your heart to share, I think that's a wonderful way to end our conversation today.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm definitely going to come check you all out.
Want to.
All right. Bye.